In this part, we're gonna set up a server on DigitalOcean platform. On DigitalOcean, servers are called droplets. So we're gonna create a droplet based on Linux Ubuntu, and we're gonna install some tools on it. So the prerequisite of this is to create a DigitalOcean account. They also have a free tier, or basically you get some credit as a first user that just registered. So you can use that actually in order to follow along without spending money. So I have a clean state here, so I don't have any droplets or other components. So the first thing is we're going to create a droplet here. It's very simple to get started. Just click create droplet, and I'm going to choose a region that is closest to my geographic location. You should choose one that is closest to yours. And here we have selection of different operating systems. In this case, we have Linux distributions. I'm going to go with Ubuntu. Then we choose a basic plan. Here you see for each droplet or server that you create on cloud, and this is the same concept, whatever platform you use, you get certain resources for your server. And you usually see those resources here. We can choose the minimal one. This should be enough for the demo. And these are the resources that our single server will have. And this is an interesting part. This is the authentication. So basically we're going to connect from local machines, so from our laptop to that remote server, so that we can perform some tasks on that, right? So we can either create new user or install Java or whatever. So we need some access, right? And we can choose between SSH, key access, or password. By default, a root user will be created on that server, and we can connect to that droplet using root user, and we can set a password for that root user here. However, it's better practice to connect with SSH keys. And because I don't have an SSH key in the entire DigitalOcean, I'll have to create the first one. And once I create the new SSH key, I can reuse it for multiple droplets actually. And I have to note here that setting an SSH key or your public SSH key here is very similar to what we did in GitLab. So we also set an SSH key there so that GitLab could authenticate us when we interacted with the repositories on GitLab. So this is a similar concept. We are creating an SSH key so that DigitalOcean can verify that it is our machine, our laptop, that is trying to access the server that we created. So the same way, we're going to go and in the home folder of my user, I have the SSH key, the public one, right? And basically you can just print it out like this, and you can then copy the output and paste it right here. And here you see I've created an SSH key. You can name it whatever you want. Should be something descriptive for you. I named it my droplet key. Probably I'm gonna reuse it for other droplets as well. So now DigitalOcean has my SSH key, and this will be used to authenticate with the droplet that I'm creating. And that's basically it. We can leave everything else as is and just click create droplet. Very simple, and you see it's booting up. This is the progress line here. So now if you go to settings and security, you can also see your SSH key here. You can add multiple ones, and you can use different ones to connect with different droplets. It's up to you, but they will all be listed here because it's for the whole DigitalOcean. Now let's go to droplets. You see the UI is very intuitive, very simple. You don't have too many components here. And if I click inside, I see some more details. First of all, the most important part probably is this one right here, is the public IP address of our server. So we created an Ubuntu server, and we can connect to that using this public IP address. However, on DigitalOcean, when we create a server, by default, it is publicly accessible on all ports. So basically, it's not secured by firewall at all, which definitely is a bad security practice. So the first thing we want to do is configure firewall to protect our server. And using firewall configuration, we will then explicitly allow public access on specific ports that we want to expose, like web server, SSH port, and so on. So instead of being open by default, we close access by default and then selectively open ports on which we need access. Now, in order to connect to the server, we're going to need to SSH into it. And the SSH port is port 22. And that means that we have to allow access to our Ubuntu server on port 22 so that we can SSH into it. And you can make this change in the networking menu. So here, if you scroll down, you see no firewall is applied to this droplet. We can do edit. And firewall is also something that is going to be listed for the whole DigitalOcean. And you see here, we jumped to the networking tab right here, so we can add new firewall rules. So let's call it my droplet firewall. If, for example, we use this droplet for a certain application, like if I had some Java application, then I could also create SSH and firewall rules and all of these per application as well. So I'm just going to write my droplet firewall. And here you see, by default, it already gives me the inbound rule, which is opening the SSH port 22 on the server. So we can connect using SSH to it. And here you see the sources are basically every laptop can do that. And obviously in real scenarios, you would not want that. You probably need to configure that only your IP address has access to it, or maybe a range of IP addresses. So we can actually configure that. I can check my IP address by going to what's my IP, and you see your IP address here. So we can add that. Now consider that IP addresses may be dynamically assigned to your laptop. So every time you restart your laptop, you can actually get a new IP address, or maybe whenever you restart the router, you may get a new IP address. So in that case, you may need to update that, or you can provide a range. And with that, we can create firewall. So our firewall got created, and if I click inside in the droplets tab, I can actually assign these firewall rules to multiple droplets. So let's see ours. This is our droplet. We just have one. And if I edit here, then you see that the droplet has that firewall rule applied right here. And here you also see the actual rules. The inbound part is basically on which ports does our droplet allow connections. So incoming requests from browser, this will be 8080 maybe, or 80, or some other ports. On SSH it's 22, etc. And outbound section is basically to which destinations can our droplet or our server actually talk to. So this is opening our droplet to internet, because obviously we need to download Java and Docker and install them and so on. So it needs internet connection, right? So outside external connection, and that's the outbound part. And obviously we allow that. An inbound part is more restricted. So now this means that I have a server that has a public IP address, and SSH port 22 is open to my laptop's IP address. So now I can connect to it from my laptop. So let's copy the IP address and go back to the command line. And here we just do SSH root and the IP address of the server. And because of SSH key, we don't have to provide a password for the root user. We don't even have the password. And now we are on our Ubuntu server as a root user. This is some information about it. And the state of this machine now is that it's completely clean. There are no applications like Java or Docker or whatever installed yet. So you are starting from a clean slate. You can actually install and configure whatever you want, or you can set up whatever application you need on that server. And since you have a root user privilege, you can do also any administrative stuff. So if I do Java here, you see I don't have Java installed, command not found, but I get some suggestions of how to install Java. So this command will actually install the 11th version of OpenJDK. However, we're going to install the version 8 of Java because we're going to need that version later for Nexus installation, because Nexus requires exactly that version. So we are going to install JDK version 8. So let's do apt-get, apt-update first. And now we can execute the install Java command. So now we have Java installed. And the same way you can add any other tools like Docker or Node and so on. You have this super helpful output here where you get the commands right away to install any of those tools with the corresponding versions.